Back in 2001, Bizarre Creations' Project Gotham Racing debuted as the premier Xbox driving game. It featured a variety of different cars and a ton of different tracks, as well as a ton of different licensed music, and just really presented itself as this great arcade-style survey racing game. It didn't have much in the way of realism. In fact, it rewarded this sort of a daring style of racing that you wouldn't necessarily want to do if you were actually on the road in one of these fancy sports cars and such. But it really distinguished itself with its own unique style of play, and it's gone on to spawn the new sequel, Project Gotham Racing 2, which is even more impressive and does more of what the original game did better, and now features online play, which is definitely one of the main attractions. There's an almost intimidating amount of content in PGR2. Fortunately, there's an instant action mode which does just that. You select that mode from the main menu, and you're thrown onto a track with a certain car and you can race. If you ignore the game's unique kudos system, this is actually a very, very straightforward game to play. You just sort of accelerate around a track, slow down around turns, and do standard racing game stuff like that. There aren't really any complex factors to take into consideration. There's very little in the way of kind of collision physics or anything like that. You don't tune your cars under the hood. This really is an arcade racing game masquerading as this realistic looking game, since it does in fact feature more than 100 different real-world vehicles and a ton of different real-world locations in which you can race. The main single-player mode of play takes you through a series of events through more than a dozen different car classes. You start off pretty humbly racing things like Honda Civics and what have you, and work your way up to the highest-end Ferraris. The game once again shines in the department of offering a ton of different vehicles to drive. PGR2 distinguishes itself by carrying both the Porsche and the Ferrari licenses, and it also has a number of other makes and models of cars ranging from Jaguar to Honda to Toyota. Really pretty much some of everything is in this game, and if you're a car enthusiast, you're definitely going to find a variety of vehicles that you'd like here. There are even some classic cars and such for good measure. Since this isn't a pure sim, the cars don't handle totally differently from one another, but do have pretty obvious differences between their top speeds and handling, and even their power sliding ability. Power sliding is one of the big things in PGR2, as it was in its predecessor. Basically, the game's kudos system rewards you for driving with daring and with style, and that's primarily manifested by your ability to power slide around corners in a controlled fashion. If you slide around a corner and bump into a wall, that's bad. You don't get any kudos points. If you do manage to slide all the way around a bend and keep on going, that's great, and you get some points, and these points are totaled up at the end of each race, and they add up to earn you kudos tokens, with which you basically buy new cars. There are plenty of cars to start out with. You've got a couple from each of the more than a dozen different classes, but you can unlock more than 70 others using these tokens. The kudos system is pretty cool overall. It's basically equivalent to the point scoring system in a game like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It gives you something else to think about aside from just accelerating around each turn and doing things like that. And since the driving physics in this game are relatively simple, it keeps things pretty interesting. Online play is really where a lot of the action is in PGR2. What's cool is you do earn kudos both online and off, and though your ranking is separate online and offline, you do earn towards the same pool of kudos tokens, so if you're performing well online and offline, you're still earning tokens with which you could unlock new cars and use them against other races online and what have you. As with most any Xbox Live compatible game, it's pretty easy to find a willing set of opponents here, and you could race against up to 7 opponents at a time. We did experience a bit of lag, but it only manifested itself with some of the opposing cars warping around the track and never affected our own ability to drive, which is great. Also, since PGR2 features literally more than 100 different tracks, there's something here for everyone, or for every racing enthusiast at least. Some of the tracks are all about top speed and your cornering ability. Some are much more kind of cross-country style affairs that are much longer. Every track is in fact a circuit. You'll be going around a number of laps before you reach the finish line, ideally before any of your competitors. But again, there's just a sheer amount of variety in PGR2 that's pretty much incomparable by other racing games out there. PGR2 is a great looking game. Some of the car models in particular are just very, very nicely done. You could tell more attention went into the Ferraris and some of the other exotic cars like that, though for the most part pretty much all the cars do look very good. Some of the track scenery can be pretty barren. The tracks themselves are rather narrow and don't always look fantastic, but again, for the most part, they look very, very impressive indeed, and there's some very nice lighting effects and kind of bump mapping effects on the roads to give the game a very realistic and very textured look. The audio is one of the game's highlights. The roar of the various cars' engines is good and all, but the soundtrack is really the main attraction where the sound is concerned. There are actually literally more than 200 songs on the soundtrack, and depending on which of the game's cities you're in, you'll hear different music that's specific to that region. So, for example, if you're racing in Moscow or Tokyo, you'll hear both DJs and music that's native to those particular regions. Considering PGR2 really cashes in on its sort of international flavor, both in the variety of cars and in the variety of environments you'll get to race in, the music actually goes a very long way toward helping the whole experience seem that much more authentic. For good measure, you could rip your own soundtrack if you want. PGR2 is very easy to recommend to anyone with a remote interest in real-life cars or in racing in general. With the online mode, it works very well, and offline you can even race against up to 3 other players on the same Xbox or system link a bunch of Xboxes together for that style of racing. The actual action on the track could have been somewhat more complex. It would have been nice to see some more lively collisions and some more kind of realistic maneuverings, but the kudos system makes things pretty entertaining in its own right, and just the sheer volume of stuff in this game makes it have a tremendous amount of lasting value. So by all means, if you're in any way interested in racing games, then definitely give PGR2 a look.